What happens when a man with all the money in the world tries to humiliate a woman he thinks has nothing? In the heart of New York City, inside one of its most exclusive restaurants, a billionaire dripping with contempt decided to mock his waitress in a language he assumed she wouldn't understand. He whispered his venom in French, a cruel joke meant for his companion's ears alone. But he made one catastrophic mistake. The waitress, a woman he saw as less than dust, didn't just understand him. She froze, not from fear, but from recognition. And in that moment, she unleashed a secret that would not only shatter his pride, but dismantle his entire empire. The air in Ethelgard wasn't just air. It was a carefully curated atmosphere. It smelled of money, old money to be precise, a subtle blend of lemon oil from the polished mahogany-aged leather from the banquettes, and the faintest, most expensive whisper of truffle oil wafting from the kitchen. From its perch on the 65th floor, the restaurant offered a view of Central Park that was itself a declaration of power. Only the city's elite could afford to look down on the world from such a height. And among the staff who moved like silent phantoms through this gilded cage, there was Clara Moreau. To the patrons, Clara was just part of the scenery. 26 years old, with eyes the color of a stormy sea and dark hair pulled back into a severe professional knot, she was impeccably efficient. Her movements were economical, her smile polite but distant, her presence deliberately unobtrusive. She refilled water glasses before they were half empty and cleared plates with a ghost-like grace. She was in every respect the perfect waitress for a place like Ethelgard, visible only when needed, invisible otherwise. But beneath the starched white shirt and black apron beat the heart of a fallen princess. Clara Moreau wasn't born to serve. She was born to be served. Her father, Jean-Luc Moreau, had been one of the world's most respected art historians and curators, a man whose word could double the value of a Renaissance painting. Her mother, Hélène, was the daughter of a French diplomat, raised in chateaux with sprawling gardens. Clara's childhood had been a whirlwind of museum galas, summers in Provence, and lessons in fencing, piano, and 3 languages. French was not a subject she had learned. It was the language of her lullabies, the tongue in which her parents whispered their love and their arguments. Then 5 years ago, the gilded world had shattered. Jean-Luc Moreau was accused of orchestrating one of the biggest art forgery scandals in modern history. A newly discovered masterpiece, a supposed work by the Dutch master Vermeer, titled The Alchemist's Daughter, was declared authentic on his authority. He staked his entire reputation on it. 6 months later, irrefutable scientific evidence proved it was a brilliant but modern fake. The fallout was catastrophic. Jean-Luc was publicly disgraced, his career obliterated. His friends in high society vanished overnight. The legal fees and penalties devoured their fortune. The man who had once commanded auction houses with a nod was now a pariah. But the true devastation was the accusation itself. He swore he was innocent, that he had been set up, that the evidence against him was manipulated. He pointed fingers at a rival, a man he'd done business with, a ruthless up-and-comer in the corporate world who had a vested interest in the painting's sale. But no one listened. The evidence was stacked, the media narrative was set, and Jean-Luc Moreau was the villain. The stress, the shame, the sheer weight of it all broke him. A massive stroke left him partially paralyzed and unable to speak clearly, his brilliant mind trapped in a failing body. Clara, then just 21, and a promising art history student at Columbia, dropped out to care for him and her heartbroken mother. Hélène, never equipped for hardship, withered. She developed a chronic illness that required expensive medication. The last of their assets were sold off including their beloved brownstone. Clara took the first job she could get that paid well enough to cover the rent on their cramped Queen's apartment and her mother's prescriptions, a waitress at Ethelgard. It was a bitter irony. Every night she served the same kind of people who had once been her family's peers, the people who had turned their backs on them without a second thought. She listened to them boast about their acquisitions and summer homes, her face a mask of polite servitude, her soul burning with a cold, quiet rage. Her only confidant at the restaurant was Sophia, another waitress with a sharp tongue and a kind heart. "I don't know how you do it, Clara," Sophia said one evening as they polished silverware in the back. "You have the patience of a saint. If Mr. Henderson from table 4 clicked his fingers at me one more time, I was going to stab him with a butter knife." Clara offered a faint smile. "Patience is a weapon, Soph. You just have to know when to use it." She held up a fork, inspecting it for smudges. The reflection showed a tired-looking young woman, but her eyes held a fire that no amount of hardship had been able to extinguish. She wasn't just waiting tables, she was waiting for a chance, any chance to reclaim her father's honor. That chance was about to walk through the door. It was a Tuesday night, typically slower, but a reservation had been made under a name that sent a ripple of energy through the staff, Damien Sterling. Mr. Dubois, the severe French manager who ran Ethelgard with military precision, briefed the staff. "Mr. Sterling is one of the most important investors in the restaurant group. He is particular. Everything must be perfect. No mistakes. Clara, you will take the table. Your professionalism is unmatched." Clara nodded, her expression unreadable. She knew the name. Damien Sterling was a titan of finance, a man who had built a multi-billion-dollar empire from nothing. His face was a regular feature in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. He was known for his aggressive takeovers, his lavish lifestyle, and his notoriously short temper. He was the epitome of new money, desperate to cloak himself in the trappings of the old world. When he arrived, he was exactly as she'd pictured. Tall, impeccably dressed in a custom Tom Ford suit with a ridiculously expensive Patek Philippe watch on his wrist that seemed to scream its own price tag. His hair was perfectly coiffed, and his smile was a predatory slash of white teeth. On his arm was a woman who looked more like an accessory than a person, stunningly beautiful, painfully thin, and wearing a dress that cost more than Clara's annual rent. Her name was Isabel. Sterling party of 2. He announced to the hostess, not with the tone of a guest arriving, but of a king entering his court. They were seated at the best table, the corner banquette, with the panoramic view. It fell within Clara's section. As she approached, she felt a familiar knot of resentment tighten in her stomach. He was just another arrogant peacock, another man who saw her as nothing more than a pair of hands to bring him his food. "Good evening," Clara said, her voice calm and even. "My name is Clara, and I will be your server this evening. May I start you with some water?" Damien didn't even look at her. He was busy showing Isabel something on his phone. He simply waved a dismissive hand. "Get us the 98 Petrus, and don't shake it." It was an order, not a request. Clara knew the wine. It was $12,000 a bottle. "An excellent choice, sir," she said, maintaining her composure. She turned to Isabel. "And for you, madam." Isabel looked up from the phone, momentarily confused, as if she hadn't expected to be spoken to. "Oh, I'll have what he's having." As Clara walked towards the wine cellar, she could hear Damien's voice, a low rumble of arrogance. He was boasting about a recent acquisition, a rival company he'd gutted and sold for parts. He spoke of people's livelihoods as if they were numbers on a spreadsheet. Clara returned with the wine, presenting it to him, as per protocol. He glanced at the label with a cursory nod, the gesture of a man performing a role he'd learned from movies. "Open it." She performed the ritual with practiced expertise, the clean cut of the foil, the silent twist of the corkscrew, the perfect pour into the decanter. Her hands were steady, betraying none of the contempt she felt. She poured a small amount for him to taste. He swirled it, sniffed it with an exaggerated air of a connoisseur, and took a sip. "Acceptable," he declared, as if he were granting the wine a pardon. For the next hour, Clara served them in near silence, moving in and out of their bubble of wealth and privilege. They ignored her completely, their conversation revolving around yachts, galas, and the vapid gossip of their social circle. Damien did most of the talking, his voice a constant stream of self-aggrandizement. Then he ordered the beluga caviar, another ostentatious display. As Clara placed the mother-of-pearl spoons on the table, Damien glanced at her for the first time, but his eyes didn't see a person. They saw an object, a prop in his performance. He leaned towards Isabel, a conspiratorial smirk on his face. He lowered his voice, believing he was creating a private, impenetrable space between them. And then he began to speak in French, a language he clearly thought was his secret weapon, a mark of his superior culture. His accent was atrocious, a clumsy, butchered version of the beautiful language Clara had grown up with. But the words were clear as a bell. "Regarde cette pauvre petite chose," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "Look at this poor little thing. Elle travaille si dur pour quelques miettes. She works so hard for a few crumbs. Je me demande si elle a jamais goûté à quelque chose de meilleur que les restes de la cuisine. I wonder if she's ever tasted anything better than scraps from the kitchen." Isabel giggled, a high-pitched, vacuous sound. "Oh, Damien, you're awful." "C'est la vie, mon chou," he continued, thoroughly enjoying himself. "That's life, my sweet. Il y a nous, et puis il y a eux. There are people like us, and then there are people like them. She probably lives in some miserable little box in a borough I wouldn't even drive through." Clara stood perfectly still. The ambient noise of the restaurant, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversations, the soft jazz from the speakers faded into a dull roar in her ears. Her breath caught in her chest. Every muscle in her body went rigid. It wasn't just the insult. She'd heard worse, endured worse. It was something else. It was his voice, that specific cadence of arrogance. It was the mention of people like us and people like them. It was a phrase that echoed in the dark recesses of her memory. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, and a scene from 5 years ago flashed through her mind. Her father, his face pale with fury, standing in his study after a phone call. That man, he had seethed to her mother. That man, Damien Sterling. He thinks there are 2 types of people in this world. People like us, he said, and people like them. And he believes he can buy and sell people like them for sport. Damien Sterling, the man who had been her father's business partner in the Vermeer deal, the man her father had accused of setting him up, the man whose name had been a curse whispered in her house for 5 long years. He was here, mocking her, in her mother's native tongue. The blood drained from her face and then rushed back with the force of a tidal wave. The silver tray in her hand felt impossibly heavy. The world narrowed to this one man, this one table. The years of quiet suffering, of swallowed pride, of seeing her family destroyed, coalesced into a single white-hot point of clarity. This wasn't just an insult. This was destiny. Damien, oblivious, took another sip of his obscenely expensive wine. He looked up at her, expecting to see the blank, servile expression of a nobody. He saw her freeze. He saw the color shift in her face. He smirked, assuming his French had somehow registered as a foreign, confusing sound, making the little waitress malfunction. He was about to make another cutting remark to Isabel, but he never got the chance. Clara's posture straightened. She lifted her chin, and the subservient mask she had worn for 5 years dissolved, replaced by an expression of cold, aristocratic fury. The humble waitress vanished, and in her place stood the daughter of Jean-Luc and Hélène Moreau. She leaned forward, not enough to be improper, but enough to command his full attention. Her voice, when it came out, was not the quiet, deferential tone of a server. It was low, flawless, and resonant with the pure Parisian accent of the French elite, an accent that made his own attempt sound like nails on a chalkboard. "Monsieur," she began the single word, cutting through the air like a shard of ice. Damien Sterling's smirk faltered. His eyes widened slightly. Isabel stopped giggling. Clara continued, her sea-storm eyes locked on his. "Si vous souhaitez critiquer ma situation en français, je vous suggère d'abord de maîtriser la langue au-delà du niveau d'un touriste cherchant les toilettes. If you wish to critique my circumstances in French, I suggest you first master the language beyond the level of a tourist asking for the bathroom." Damien's jaw went slack. The wine glass in his hand trembled. He was utterly, completely frozen. He understood every single perfectly enunciated word. But Clara wasn't finished. She pressed her advantage, her voice dropping to a near whisper, laced with venom. "Votre accent est aussi maladroit que vos manières. Et quant à ce que j'ai goûté ou non, sachez que j'ai été élevé dans un monde dont vous ne faites que porter le costume. Your accent is as clumsy as your manners. And as for what I have or have not tasted, know that I was raised in a world for which you only wear the costume." She held his stunned, panicked gaze for a beat longer, letting the weight of her words land. The silence at the table was absolute. Isabel looked back and forth between them, her face a mask of complete confusion. Then, with a poise that was nothing short of breathtaking, Clara straightened up, gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, and said in perfect professional English, "Please enjoy your caviar, sir." And she turned and walked away, her back ramrod straight, leaving Damien Sterling sitting in the ruins of his own arrogance, his face a ghastly shade of pale. He wasn't just mocked, he was exposed, and in his eyes, Clara saw something more than just humiliation. She saw fear. He hadn't just been outsmarted by a waitress. He had been recognized by a ghost from the past he thought he had buried forever. The walk from Damien Sterling's table to the sanctuary of the kitchen felt like traversing a chasm. Clara's legs moved on autopilot, her mind a maelstrom. The adrenaline coursing through her veins made her hands tremble, but her resolve was forged in steel. She pushed through the swinging doors into the chaotic symphony of the kitchen, the clatter of pans, the hiss of the grill, the shouted orders of the chefs, and it was like coming up for air after being held underwater. Sophia was by the service station, inputting an order. She took one look at Clara's face, and her eyes widened. "Clara, what happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse," Clara breathed, leaning against the cold stainless steel counter. "I've seen a monster." Before she could explain, the kitchen door swung open with such force that it slammed against the rubber stopper. Mr. Dubois, the manager, stood in the doorway, his normally placid face a thundercloud. His eyes scanned the kitchen and locked onto Clara. "Moreau, my office. Now," he barked. A hush fell over the kitchen staff. A summons to Dubois' office mid-shift meant one thing: termination. Sophia shot Clara a panicked look. Clara, however, felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. Getting fired was the least of her worries now. Everything had changed. She followed Dubois into his cramped, windowless office. He closed the door behind them and gestured sharply to the chair opposite his desk. He sat down, steepled his fingers, and fixed her with a hard stare. "Explain," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Mr. Sterling is one of our most significant patrons. He has just informed the hostess that he is leaving, that he has been egregiously insulted by his server, and that he will be speaking to the ownership group tomorrow morning. He demands your immediate dismissal. So I will ask you one time, Clara. What did you do?" Clara met his gaze without flinching. "I spoke to him in French." Dubois' eyebrows shot up. As a native of Lyon, he was proud of his heritage. "You spoke to him in French? What could you possibly have said in French to provoke such a reaction?" This was the moment. She could lie down, play it, try to save her job, or she could tell the truth. The choice was easy. "He was speaking about me to his companion." Clara began, her voice steady. "He assumed because I am a waitress that I was uneducated and would not understand. He called me a poor little thing who survives on scraps from the kitchen. He mocked my presumed social status. His French was, to be frank, atrocious." Dubois listened, his expression shifting from anger to intense curiosity. "And your reply?" "My reply," Clara said, her voice taking on the same icy precision she had used at the table, was delivered in the French my mother taught me. I suggested that if he wished to insult someone in a language, he should endeavor to learn it properly first. I told him his accent was as clumsy as his manners, and I informed him that I was raised in the world he merely pretends to be a part of. A long silence filled the small office. Mr. Dubois stared at her, not as a manager looking at an errant employee, but as a man reassessing everything he thought he knew. He leaned back in his chair, a slow, unreadable expression dawning on his face. He had always recognized a certain refinement in Clara, a grace that went beyond mere professional training. Now the pieces were clicking into place. "Moreau," he said, her surname sounding different now, more formal. "What is your story?" "My father is Jean-Luc Moreau," she said simply. The name landed in the room with the weight of a dropped statue. Dubois' eyes widened in recognition. Anyone in the world of high culture, especially a Frenchman like himself, knew that name. Jean-Luc Moreau. The brilliant curator. The tragic scandal. Mon Dieu. Dubois breathed, looking at her as if for the first time. The art historian. The same, Clara confirmed. And Damien Sterling is the man who destroyed him. He was my father's partner on the Vermeer deal. My father was convinced Sterling framed him, silencing him, just as he was about to expose the painting as a forgery himself. Sterling bought the masterpiece for a pittance after the scandal, and it now hangs in his private collection as a trophy of his victory. The full horrifying scope of the evening's confrontation settled upon Dubois. It wasn't a waitress snapping at a rude customer. It was an act of long-simmering justice. It was a daughter defending her father's honor against the very man who had ruined him. He was quiet for a long time, tapping a pen on his desk. "Mr. Sterling has immense power," he said, finally, his voice now laced with concern. "He could cause significant trouble for this restaurant. For me. For you." "I know," Clara said. "I'm prepared to leave. I understand the position I've put you in." Dubois shook his head slowly. "No, you don't understand." He stood up and walked to the door. He opened it and looked out at the bustling kitchen, then back at her. "For 5 years I have run this establishment based on a single principle: excellence. Mr. Sterling, for all his money, is a vulgar man who appreciates only the price of things, not their value. He ordered a 98 Petrus and drank it like it was grape juice." He let out a short, sharp sigh. "You, Mademoiselle Moreau, possess a quality that money cannot buy. Class, integrity." He looked her straight in the eye. To hell with Damien Sterling. You are not fired. Take the rest of the night off, on full pay. Go home and be with your family." Clara was stunned into silence. She had expected dismissal, not solidarity. A wave of gratitude so powerful it almost brought tears to her eyes, washed over her. "Monsieur, I thank you." "Nonsense," he said with a dismissive wave, though a flicker of a smile touched his lips. "He insulted you in my native tongue. Consider it a matter of national pride." He paused. "And Clara, be careful. A man like Sterling, when humiliated, does not simply walk away. He retaliates." Clara left Ethelgard and stepped out into the cool night air of Columbus Circle. The city lights, usually a source of oppressive anonymity, seemed to sparkle with possibility tonight. The confrontation had been like a lightning strike, illuminating a path forward that had been shrouded in darkness for 5 long years. Her father's words echoed in her mind. Patience is a weapon, but it is useless without a target. Tonight, she had found her target. The subway ride to Queens was a blur. When she arrived at their small 3rd-floor walk-up, the smell of lavender and old books greeted her. She found her mother, Helene, asleep in an armchair in the living room, a thin blanket pulled over her lap, an open book of French poetry resting on her chest. Helene looked so fragile, a pale shadow of the vibrant woman she once was. Clara gently took the book, placed a bookmark in it, and draped the blanket more securely around her mother's shoulders. The sight of her mother's quiet suffering solidified the new, dangerous resolve taking root in her heart. In the small room that served as her father's bedroom and study, she found him awake, sitting in his wheelchair by the window, looking out at the brick wall of the adjacent building. The stroke had stolen his words, but not the intelligence in his eyes. He turned his head as she entered, and his gaze was sharp, questioning. He could always tell when something was wrong, or in this case, when something was different. She knelt by his wheelchair, taking his good hand in hers. "Papa," she said softly. "I saw him tonight. Damien Sterling." Her father's hand convulsed in hers. A low, guttural sound of frustration and rage escaped his lips, one of the few sounds he could still make. His eyes burned with a fire she hadn't seen in years. "He was at the restaurant," Clara continued, her voice low and intense. "He tried to humiliate me. He didn't know who I was, but I knew who he was. And Papa, I didn't stay silent." She recounted the entire exchange, word for word, in French. As she spoke, she watched her father's face. The frustration gave way to shock, then to something else, a fierce, blazing pride. A single tear tracked its way down his wrinkled cheek. When she finished, he squeezed her hand with surprising strength, his eyes conveying everything his voice could not good. "It has begun." For the first time in 5 years, Clara felt not like a victim of circumstance, but an agent of her own destiny. Dubois' warning echoed in her head. A man like Sterling retaliates. She knew this wasn't the end. It was the opening salvo of a war she had just declared. Sterling wouldn't just try to get her fired now, he would try to crush her. He couldn't afford to have a ghost with the name Moreau walking around New York, especially one who wasn't afraid of him. She went to her own small room and pulled out a worn, leather-bound trunk from under her bed. Inside was the wreckage of her former life photographs, university textbooks, and at the very bottom, a collection of her father's notebooks. These weren't his published works, but his private research journals, filled with his elegant looping script detailing his thoughts, his discoveries, his doubts. She had packed them away because looking at them was too painful. Now she opened them with a new purpose. She spent the rest of the night poring over the entries from the months, leading up to the scandal. She read about his initial excitement over The Alchemist's Daughter, his meticulous examination of the canvas, the pigments, the craquelure. And then she found it, an entry dated 2 weeks before the scandal broke. Her father's handwriting was agitated sharper than usual. "Something is wrong with the lead tin yellow," he had written. "The particle composition, it's too uniform, almost unnaturally so. It's consistent with the 17th century, but it lacks the subtle, almost imperceptible inclusions of silica one would expect from the milling process of the era. It feels manufactured, perfect in a way that feels false." She read on, her heart pounding. "I raised my preliminary concerns with Damien today. He dismissed them out of hand. 'You're being paranoid, Jean-Luc,' he said. 'This is our golden goose. Don't ruin it with academic fussiness.' His eagerness to rush to authentication is unseemly. It feels less like passion for the art and more like pure avarice. He's already pre-sold shares in the painting to a consortium of investors. If this painting is revealed as a fake before the public sale, he will be ruined and exposed as a fraud." The final chilling entry on the subject was from 2 days before his public disgrace. "I am certain now. It's a forgery, a masterful one, but a forgery nonetheless. There's a particular technique in the underdrawing of the girl's sleeve, a cross-hatching style, that is a signature of a known 20th century forger, Han van Meegeren's most gifted student. I have a sample ready to send for independent spectrographic analysis. I will confront Damien with my full findings tomorrow morning. The truth must come out." He never got the chance. The next day, an anonymous tip led investigators to a Swiss bank account, opened in her father's name, with a multi-million-dollar deposit traced back to the sellers of the painting. The independent analysis he had commissioned was mysteriously intercepted and replaced with a doctored report confirming the painting's authenticity. He was framed perfectly and completely. Clara closed the journal, her hands shaking. This was it. This was the proof. It wasn't just her father's word against Sterling's. It was his contemporaneous documented research. Sterling hadn't just profited from the scandal. He had orchestrated it to stop her father from exposing him. He'd pre-sold shares in a painting he knew might be fake, a massive act of fraud. A cold, hard plan began to form in her mind. A public confrontation was not enough. Humiliating him was not enough. She had to dismantle him. She had to take away everything he had built on the ashes of her family's name. And she knew just how to do it. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Sophia. Dubois just got off the phone. Said it was the big boss. You're not fired, but you're on indefinite paid leave. He said to tell you to lay low. Sounds more like a warning to me. Be careful, C. Lay low. It was good advice. It was also advice she had no intention of taking. Laying low was what she had done for 5 years. The time for hiding was over. The time for hunting had begun. She looked at her father's journal, then at her own reflection in the dark window. The waitress was gone. In her place was Clara Moreau, and she was coming for Damien Sterling with a weapon far more powerful than money, the truth. The indefinite paid leave was a gilded cage, a temporary sanctuary bought by Mr. Dubois' courage. Clara knew it wouldn't last. Damien Sterling was not a man to forgive or forget a public humiliation. He would investigate the waitress who had so thoroughly flayed him. He would dig until he unearthed the name Moreau, and the moment he did, his fear would ignite a far more dangerous fire. Her time was running out. She didn't waste a second. Her cramped Queen's apartment became the headquarters of a one-woman insurgency. The years of quiet grief were over, replaced by a cold, energizing fury. She unearthed the leather trunk containing the last vestiges of her father's academic life, his private research journals. For 5 years they had been monuments to her pain. Now they were an arsenal. With a methodical focus she hadn't felt since her university days, she devoured the entries from the months leading up to the scandal. She read of her father's initial awe at The Alchemist's Daughter, his meticulous notes on its composition, and then the dawning, sickening realization that something was wrong. She found the key passage, the one that made her heart hammer against her ribs. Her father's script sharp with agitation. Something is wrong with the lead tin yellow. It lacks the subtle inclusions of silica. It feels manufactured. I raised my concerns with Damien today. He dismissed them. "This is our golden goose, Jean-Luc," he said. "Don't ruin it." His avarice is alarming. He has already pre-sold shares in the painting to investors. If this is a fake, he isn't just a fool. He's a fraud. The final entry, dated just 2 days before his public ruin, was the smoking gun. I am certain now. It's a forgery. A masterful one, but a forgery. The underdrawing of the sleeve, it contains a cross-hatching style, a signature of a known 20th century forger. I have a sample ready for independent analysis. I will confront Damien with my full findings tomorrow. Clara closed the journal, her hands trembling, not with fear, but with vindication. This was the proof. Her father was on the verge of exposing Sterling's massive financial fraud when Sterling had framed him, turning the truth on its head. But a journal, however damning, wasn't enough. It was her word, the word of a bitter daughter, against a billionaire's. She needed an ally, someone with unimpeachable credibility, someone known for hunting monsters like Sterling. Her mind immediately seized on one name, Arthur Finch. A lion of investigative journalism, Finch had been forced into retirement from the New York Ledger, but his reputation for dismantling corrupt financiers was legendary. Crucially, she remembered a single skeptical article he'd written about her father's case years ago, questioning the convenient perfection of the narrative against him. He had seen the masterpiece of misdirection. Finding him was a challenge. He was a ghost in the digital age. An old press club directory finally led her to a dusty, cavernous bookstore in the East Village called The Final Word. A small bell announced her entry into a maze of towering, precarious stacks of books. Behind a counter that served as a fortress against the world sat a man with rumpled clothes, thinning grey hair, and the deeply cynical eyes of someone who had seen humanity's worst. "We close in 5 minutes," he grumbled, not bothering to look up from his newspaper. "Mr. Finch," Clara said, her voice clear and strong. "My name is Clara Moreau. My father was Jean-Luc Moreau." The newspaper lowered slowly. Arthur Finch's pale blue eyes, magnified by his spectacles, appraised her with piercing intensity. I remember the name. The story's old and cold. "What do you want?" "I want to reignite it," she replied, stepping forward and placing her father's journal on the counter between them. This is his private journal from right before the scandal. It proves he knew the Vermeer was a fake. It proves Damien Sterling had a multi-million-dollar motive to silence him and frame him. Finch's bored facade cracked, replaced by the keen, predatory interest of a reporter, smelling blood. He opened the journal with a reverence for evidence that Clara deeply appreciated. His finger traced the elegant script. "A diary can be dismissed," he rasped, testing her. "Sterling will claim your father wrote it after the fact to save himself." "He had a stroke 5 years ago, Mr. Finch. He hasn't been able to write his own name since," Clara countered coolly. "The entries are dated. They are his real-time thoughts. And more importantly, he mentions a specific piece of evidence, a forger's signature hidden in the underdrawing of the painting. That was the hook. Finch leaned in the old fire rekindling in his eyes. "Okay, kid, you've got my undivided attention. But to nail a man like Sterling, we need more than a book. We need a public stage, and we need a cannonball of irrefutable proof to fire from it." "I have the stage," Clara said instantly, the plan that had been forming in her mind, now crystallizing. "In 2 weeks, Sterling is hosting his annual Patron's Heart Gala. It's his biggest night of self-promotion, and the auction centerpiece this year is a charcoal sketch, a supposed study for the alchemist's daughter." Finch let out a low, appreciative whistle. The sheer, unmitigated gall. He's not just polishing his trophy, he's selling tickets to see it. It's the perfect stage for an implosion. He paused, his gaze hardening. "But what's the cannonball? The signature you mentioned is on the actual painting, which is hanging in his penthouse. We need to see it. We need forensic quality images." The challenge seemed insurmountable. Sterling's penthouse was a fortress, but a sly, calculating smile spread across Arthur's face. His ego may be his undoing. He's desperate for legitimacy. So desperate he just hired a new private curator to catalogue his collection. A brilliant but hopelessly naive academic named Dr. Alistair Finch. Clara stared. "Finch?" "My nephew," Arthur confirmed with a grimace, "thinks his Uncle Arthur is a journalistic troglodyte. But he's family, and he's about to unwittingly help us commit a beautiful act of sabotage." The plan they hatched was as simple as it was audacious. Arthur would leverage a vague family obligation to have Alistair hire a specialist for his cataloguing project. Clara would become Anna, a freelance art photographer and research assistant with a stellar and fabricated portfolio. Her sole mission, infiltrate the lion's den and capture high-resolution, multispectral images of the forgery's hidden signature. The next 10 days were a blur of transformation. Clara shed the skin of the waitress and the grieving daughter. Using the last of her funds, she acquired a new uniform, understated intellectual, and expensive enough to pass muster. She spent hours in the New York Public Library, refreshing her knowledge on art forensics and photographic techniques, becoming Anna in mind as well as appearance. In a moment of calculated risk, she sent a heavily encrypted message to Dr. Isabella Rossi, her father's most trusted colleague in Florence, a world-renowned expert in pigment analysis. The message was simple. "Found father's notes. Proof is coming. Stand by." The reply was instantaneous for Jean-Luc, always. The day of the visit, a knot of pure ice formed in Clara's stomach. Arthur met her for coffee, his usual cynicism replaced by a paternal concern. "Remember you are Anna," he coached. "Professional, quiet, detached. Sterling will be there preening over his possessions. He is your target, but he cannot know it. Get the pictures and get out." Sterling's penthouse was exactly as she'd imagined, a sterile monument to wealth on Billionaires' Row. It was less a home than a private gallery of financial conquests, with masterpieces by Rothko and Bacon hanging like hostages on vast white walls. And there, dominating the central living space, was the beautiful lie itself, the alchemist's daughter. Seeing it in person sent a jolt through her, a mixture of revulsion and awe at the forger's skill. Damian Sterling, dressed in a ludicrously expensive cashmere tracksuit, greeted them with the bored air of a king receiving tribute. Arthur's nephew Alistair, a nervous young man swimming in a tweed jacket, made the introductions. "Mr. Sterling, this is Anna, the photographic documentarian I hired. Her work is first-rate." Sterling's cold, reptilian eyes swept over Clara. It was a moment of supreme terror. Would he see her, the waitress from Ethelgard? The woman who had gutted his pride with a few perfectly spoken words of French? He saw nothing. He saw a plain, scholarly woman who posed no threat, another hired hand to be ignored. "Fine," he grunted, already turning back to a massive screen displaying stock tickers. "Alistair, supervise her. Make sure she doesn't touch anything." The dismissal was a gift. It allowed Clara to fade into her role. With trembling insides but rock-steady hands, she began her work methodically photographing several pieces to establish her cover. She could feel Sterling watching her intermittently from across the room, his gaze not one of suspicion, but of smug ownership, as an expert validated his collection. The irony was suffocating. She saved The Alchemist's Daughter for last. Given its provenance, I'll need to use multispectral imaging to create a full record for the insurance catalogue, she explained to Alistair, her voice a flat, academic monotone. "Brilliant, of course," he replied, eager to contribute. This was the moment. She adjusted her powerful camera and tripod fitting the infrared lens. She focused on the sleeve of the girl's dress, the very spot her father's journal had described. Through the viewfinder, the painted surface was opaque. But on her camera's small digital screen, which processed the infrared light, the ghostly underdrawing began to appear. Her heart hammered. And then she saw it. Faint but absolutely clear. A specific geometric cross-hatching pattern in the folds of the fabric, a stylistic tick as unique as a fingerprint. It was the forger's signature. She had him. She took a dozen shots from every conceivable angle her movements practiced, and calm. The evidence was now digital, captured secure. She downloaded the files to an encrypted drive and then wiped the camera's memory card clean as Alistair looked on oblivious. As she packed her gear, Sterling sauntered over, a proprietary gleam in his eye. "Impressive, isn't it?" he said, gesturing to the painting. "My Vermeer." The temptation to strike, to wipe that smirk off his face with a single sentence, was overwhelming. But she held his gaze, her face a perfect mask of professional detachment. She was Anna. "It's a most compelling painting, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice even. "A truly fascinating subject for technical analysis." It was the perfect, bloodless response music to his arrogant ears. He nodded, satisfied that his possession had been appropriately admired, and dismissed her with a wave. Clara walked out of that penthouse and into the New York afternoon, the encrypted drive in her pocket feeling like a detonator. She had walked into the heart of her enemy's fortress, looked him in the eye, and stolen the secret that would bring his entire world crashing down. The ghost had gathered her proof. Now it was time to set the stage for the haunting. The fortnight leading to the Patron's Heart Gala was a period of intense, focused activity. Arthur Finch's bookstore, The Final Word, transformed from a dusty sanctuary of old knowledge into a clandestine war room. The air, usually thick with the scent of aging paper, now crackled with conspiracy, and the hum of a laser printer churning out evidence. The encrypted drive containing the images from Sterling's penthouse was their primary asset, and they prepared to leverage it with the precision of a military strike. The first move was to send the multispectral images to Dr. Isabella Rossi in Florence. Working through secure channels, the fiercely loyal art historian analyzed the data with a passion fueled by her belief in Jean-Luc Moreau's innocence. The report she sent back less than 72 hours later was more than just a confirmation. It was an executioner's warrant. Dr. Rossi's analysis not only corroborated the chemical anomalies in the pigments her father had first noted, but it also presented a side-by-side comparison of the infrared underdrawing from The Alchemist's Daughter with known works by a specific 20th century forger. The match was perfect, the stylistic signature undeniable. Her conclusion was stated with absolute scientific certainty. The painting was a modern fake. The cannonball was now forged and ready. While Clara absorbed the report, steeling her resolve, Arthur worked his own magic. He became a ghost in the machine, calling in favors from a lifetime of journalistic integrity. He prepared a comprehensive press kit containing Dr. Rossi's findings, key excerpts from Jean-Luc's journal, and a timeline of the original scandal ready for instantaneous digital release. He made discreet calls to trusted contacts at the Securities and Exchange Commission and the District Attorney's Office, not revealing his hand, but advising them to pay very close attention to Damien Sterling's gala auction. Think of it as a potential philanthropic anomaly, he'd said, his voice laced with intrigue. His final preparations involved coaching Clara. You cannot go in there as a vengeful daughter, he instructed her, pacing the cramped back room. Emotion is Sterling's weapon. He will paint you as hysterical. You must be cold, factual, and unshakable. You are not there to accuse. You are there to present incontrovertible facts. You are an art historian just like your father. You will honor him with his own weapon, the truth. Clara understood. This required one last transformation. She couldn't be the waitress nor the timid academic, Anna. She had to embody the legacy Sterling had tried to erase. With the funds from Mr. Dubois and a loan from Arthur, she procured her armor, a vintage sapphire blue silk gown. It was a statement of timeless elegance, not fleeting wealth. Her hair was swept into a graceful chignon, her only jewelry a pair of pearl earrings that had belonged to her mother. When she looked at her reflection, she saw the woman she was meant to be, her stormy eyes, burning with a purpose that left no room for fear. The night of the gala, the Temple of Denda at the Metropolitan Museum, was a shimmering spectacle of performative charity. The air was heavy with expensive perfume and the self-congratulatory chatter of New York's elite. Clara moved through the crowd, a ghost of their world they failed to recognize. They saw only an elegant stranger, not the daughter of the man they had so easily condemned. She saw them for what they were, courtiers to a hollow king. And there was the king himself, Damien Sterling, holding court near the stage. He was incandescent with pride, accepting praise for his generosity, his trophy girlfriend Isabel glittering with diamonds on his arm. He looked untouchable, a man so insulated by his wealth he believed himself immune to consequence. Clara took a glass of champagne, the cool stem grounding her. She found Arthur near the edge of the room, looking wonderfully out of place in his rumpled suit. He gave her a single, sharp nod. The signal. After a series of fawning speeches, Sterling took the stage himself, bathing in the warm glow of the spotlight and applause. "It is the greatest honor of my life to support the arts," he purred into the microphone. "And in that spirit I am delighted to offer a truly special piece from my personal collection for tonight's auction." An assistant unveiled the charcoal sketch, The Study for the Alchemist's Daughter. The auctioneer began his rapid-fire chant, and the bidding war commenced. It was a frenzy of ego hands shooting up across the room, the price climbing into the hundreds of thousands. With every bid the lie was reinforced, Sterling's fraud gilded with another layer of public validation. He watched a smug smile plastered on his face. This was his moment of ultimate triumph. The bidding hit $500,000. "Sold to the gentleman in the third row." The auctioneer was about to cry, his gavel raised. "Wait!" The word, though spoken at a normal volume, sliced through the hall's acoustics with the clarity of a ringing bell. The gavel froze mid-air. The auctioneer faltered. A ripple of confusion went through the crowd as every head turned to find the source of the interruption. Clara Moreau stepped out from the shadows of a column, the light catching the deep blue of her dress. She moved forward, her gaze locked on the man on the stage. Sterling squinted, annoyed. "I'm sorry, madam, this is a private event." "I am aware," Clara said, her voice steady and resonant as she continued her deliberate walk towards the stage. The crowd instinctively parted for her. "My name is Clara Moreau." The name landed with the force of a physical blow. A collective gasp followed by an explosion of whispers swept the room. Moreau, Jean-Luc Moreau's daughter. Sterling's face, which had been a mask of smug satisfaction, turned to chalk. The blood drained from his face as he stared at the ghost who had come to haunt his feast. "I am Jean-Luc Moreau's daughter," she announced, her voice rising to fill the sudden silence. "And as an art historian, I have a professional and moral duty to inform everyone here of the true nature of the item you are bidding on." "Security," Sterling hissed, his composure shattering. "Remove this woman immediately. She's deranged." 2 guards started towards her, but Arthur Finch moved to intercept them, flashing his old press credentials like a shield. "She has a right to be heard," he stated with quiet authority. Clara paid them no mind. Her entire focus was on Sterling. "This sketch," she declared, pointing a graceful hand towards the easel, "is not a glimpse into the mind of a 17th century master. It is a modern accessory to an elaborate multi-million-dollar fraud." "You're insane," Sterling shouted, his voice cracking. "A bitter girl trying to slander my name to avenge your criminal father." "My father was not a criminal," Clara shot back, her voice ringing with the clarity of truth. "He was a man of integrity who was silenced. He was framed by the one person who stood to lose everything if the real truth came out. A man who had already committed massive fraud by pre-selling shares in a painting he was privately being warned was a fake. That man was you, Mr. Sterling." She raised her phone, and on the large screens flanking the stage, an image appeared, a page from her father's journal, his elegant script detailing his suspicions. As the crowd murmured, she swiped, and the next image appeared, the stark, black and white infrared photograph of the sleeve, the forger's unique cross-hatching, circled in red. "My father knew the forger had left a signature, a stylistic tick hidden beneath the paint," she explained, her voice clinical and precise. A signature he was about to expose. "This is it." The next slide was a side-by-side comparison from Dr. Rossi's report, placing the infrared image next to a known sample from the 20th century forger. The patterns were identical. This is not Vermeer. It is a lie authenticated by a report from one of the world's leading experts, Dr. Isabella Rossi. Sterling was cornered, his face slick with sweat. "Lies. This is all fake doctored images, slander." He roared, but his denials were hollow, drowned out by the weight of the evidence on the screens. "Is it?" Clara asked softly. And then came the final devastating blow. From the side of the stage, a pale, trembling figure emerged. It was Alistair Finch, Arthur's nephew, his face a mask of horrified resolution, held up a tablet. "Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice shaking but clear enough for the microphone to catch. "Your own financial records, which I am charged with maintaining, show a payment of $2 million to a shell corporation. The payment was made 2 days before Dr. Moreau was publicly accused. That shell corporation has been traced back to the firm that produced the fraudulent authentication report used to frame him. If the art historical evidence was a dagger, this was the poison on its tip. The accusation was no longer just about a fake painting. It was about conspiracy wire fraud and a criminal plot to destroy an innocent man. The entire room erupted. The facade of civility crumbled. Sterling stood alone on the stage, a pariah under the hot lights, his powerful friends physically recoiling from him. His empire of lies had dissolved in a matter of minutes. As he stood there, speechless and exposed, the main doors of the hall swung open. 2 uniformed officers and 2 detectives in sharp suits entered not with urgency, but with the calm, inexorable purpose of fate. They walked directly towards the stage, their eyes fixed on one man. Clara watched them approach. She felt no elation, only a profound, solemn quiet. Her quest was over. The sword she had forged from truth had done its work. The ghost had finally brought the monster into the light. In the end, it wasn't a clash of titans. It was a story of quiet, unyielding truth against loud, hollow arrogance. Clara Moreau, the woman Damien Sterling saw as nothing, became his everything, his judge, his jury, and the architect of his downfall. Sterling was arrested that night, his empire collapsing under the weight of dozens of fraud investigations. The name Jean-Luc Moreau was not only cleared, but celebrated his genius and integrity finally vindicated. Clara, no longer a waitress or a ghost, used her family's reclaimed legacy to establish a foundation dedicated to fighting art fraud and supporting artists, ensuring no one would suffer the way her father did. Her story is a powerful reminder that wealth can build palaces, but it can never build character. True power lies not in what you have, but in who you are and the courage you have to defend it. If you are cheering for Clara's incredible victory, please give this video a like and share it with someone who loves a story of justice served cold. Let us know in the comments what you think was the most satisfying moment of Damien Sterling's downfall. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more unforgettable stories of unexpected heroes and righteous revenge. What if the person you dismissed as invisible, the one you treated as nothing more than an obstacle in your path, was secretly the one who held your entire world in their hands? This isn't a fairy tale. It's a story about the deceptive nature of power and the quiet strength of those we overlook. It's about a waitress named Clara Evans, whose worn-out shoes and tired smile concealed a secret that was about to bring the city's most arrogant billionaire, Damien Sterling, to his knees. It's a reminder that karma doesn't always send a warning, and sometimes the bill comes due in the most unexpected way imaginable. Stay with us to hear how a single glass of spilled wine in a high-end restaurant triggered the collapse of an empire. The Gilded Sparrow wasn't just a restaurant, it was a theatre. Every night the same play was performed under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers. The actors were the city's elite, the tech moguls, the banking scions, the old money matriarchs, and the stagehands were people like Clara Evans. Her role was simple: be swift, be silent, and above all, be invisible. At 28, Clara wore her waitress uniform like a second skin. It was a well-tailored but drab grey dress, a canvas onto which the wealthy patrons could project their own importance. She had learned the geography of this world intimately, the precise angle to pour the Chateau Margaux to avoid a single drop marring the white linen, the exact moment to clear a plate without interrupting the flow of a multi-million-dollar conversation, and the carefully neutral expression to maintain when a dismissive hand was waved in her face. Clara wasn't born into this life of servitude. In fact, her life had been a quiet academic one. She'd graduated with a degree in art history, dreaming of curating galleries and preserving beauty. But life, as it so often does, had other plans. A family illness had drained her savings, and her father's death a year ago had left her unmoored adrift in a sea of debt and grief. The Gilded Sparrow, with its lucrative tips, was a life raft. It was meant to be temporary, a stopgap, until she could find her footing again. But months had bled into 2 years, and the apron strings felt more like chains every day. Her colleagues saw her as quiet and efficient. They knew she was smart, She'd sometimes help their kids with homework, questions they couldn't answer, but they assumed her past was as unremarkable as her present. No one knew about the worn copy of Proust in her locker, or the sketches of Renaissance architecture she drew on napkins during her break. To them she was just Clara, reliable, steady, forgettable. This particular Tuesday evening was no different. The air hummed with the low thrum of expensive chatter. Clara moved between tables with a practiced grace, her mind a whirlwind of orders, allergies, and special requests. Table 7 needed more bread. Table 12's steak was to be butterfly cut, medium well, a culinary sin she was paid not to judge. Her manager Marcus, a perpetually stressed man whose smile never quite reached his eyes, pulled her aside near the service station. "Clara, table 3. It's Damien Sterling. You know the drill." Clara's stomach tightened. Everyone knew the drill with Mr. Sterling. He was the CEO of Sterling Prescott Holdings, a massive luxury goods conglomerate that owned everything from boutique hotels to high-fashion labels. He was a titan of industry, a regular fixture in Forbes, and notoriously the worst customer in the city. He treated service staff like dirt beneath his custom-made Italian leather shoes. The unspoken rule was to give him what he wanted before he knew he wanted it, and never ever make a mistake. "He's with the board from a Japanese firm they're trying to acquire." "High stakes," Marcus whispered, wiping a bead of sweat from his temple. "Just be perfect." Clara nodded, her expression unreadable. "Of course, Marcus." She took a deep breath, straightened her apron, and approached the table. Damien Sterling sat at the head holding court. He was exactly as his public image suggested, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, a ridiculously expensive watch on his wrist, and a look of bored arrogance etched onto his handsome face. He wasn't speaking. He was pontificating his voice, a smooth, confident baritone that cut through the restaurant's ambient noise. His guests, 3 impeccably dressed Japanese businessmen and a younger, nervous-looking associate, listened with rapt attention. "The market waits for no one," Sterling was saying, gesturing with a hand that had clearly never seen a day of hard labor. "Sentimentality legacy. These are anchors. You cut them loose or you sink." Clara waited for a pause that never came. Finally, she stepped forward. "Good evening, Mr. Sterling. Gentlemen, may I offer you an aperitif while you look over the menu?" Sterling didn't even look at her. He simply raised one finger, a gesture that said, "Wait." Clara froze, her body held in a state of suspended service, a living statue in a grey dress. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, the familiar sting of humiliation. She wasn't a person to him. She was an interruption. After finishing his point with a self-satisfied smirk, he finally turned his head, his cold blue eyes scanning her from head to toe with a look of utter disinterest. "We'll start with a bottle of the 82 Petrus," he said, his tone suggesting he was ordering a soda. He hadn't glanced at the wine list. He didn't need to. He was the kind of man who knew the most expensive thing on it by heart. "An excellent choice," Sir Clara replied, her voice professionally placid. He waved a dismissive hand, already turning back to his guests. "Just bring it." As Clara walked towards the wine cellar, she could feel his presence like a physical weight on the entire room. He was a black hole of ego, pulling all light and energy towards himself. She thought of her father, Arthur. He had been a businessman too, a small-scale builder who knew every one of his employees by name. He believed a company was a family, that its foundation was respect. Men like Damien Sterling were everything her father had despised. They built empires on the backs of invisible people, never once thinking to look down. Little did she know her father's world and Damien Sterling's were about to collide with her standing at the epicenter. And in her locker next to the copy of Proust was a thick manila envelope from a law firm, an envelope she hadn't yet found the courage to open. The 82 Waitress was stored in the deep cellar, a hallowed space where bottles worth more than Clara's car rested in silent, temperature-controlled reverence. She retrieved it with the care of a museum curator handling a priceless artifact. The bottle was cool and heavy in her hands, a vessel of fermented history. For a fleeting moment, she wondered what it tasted like, this nectar of the gods that men like Sterling consumed so casually. Returning to the table, she presented the bottle to him as protocol dictated. Again, he didn't look at her, merely grunting his approval. Clara began the delicate ritual of opening the wine. The cork came out with a soft, satisfying sigh. She poured a small amount into a decanter, the deep, ruby liquid swirling like liquid velvet. Then she poured a tasting measure into Sterling's glass. He picked it up, swirled it with an air of practiced connoisseurship, and took a sip. He held the wine in his mouth for a moment, before swallowing. Fine, he declared, not to her, but to the table at large, as if the wine had simply materialized in his glass. Clara began to pour for his guests. She moved with practiced economical movements, her focus entirely on the task. She served the Japanese businessman first, her hands steady, her presence unobtrusive. As she moved around the table to pour for Sterling's young associate, a man named Peterson, he shifted suddenly in his seat, nervously adjusting his tie. His elbow jutted out, knocking Clara's arm just as she was tilting the decanter. Time seemed to slow down. The heavy crystal decanter slipped from her grasp, and the world became a tableau of impending disaster. She saw the dark red cascade of wine, a beautiful, terrible arc through the air. It didn't land on the table. It didn't land on the floor. It landed squarely on the front of Damien Sterling's crisp white $1,000 shirt. Silence. A collective gasp seemed to be sucked out of the room. All conversation at the surrounding tables ceased. Every eye in the Gilded Sparrow was on table 3. The wine spread across Sterling's shirt like a grotesque blooming flower. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "I am so sorry, Mr. Sterling," she stammered, her professional composure shattered. "It was an accident. Before she could finish, Damien Sterling rose slowly from his chair. His face, moments before a mask of casual arrogance, was now a thundercloud of pure fury. His blue eyes, once cold, were now blazing. He looked down at the crimson stain on his chest, then up at her. He didn't shout. His voice, when it came, was low, controlled, and infinitely more terrifying than any yell. An accident, he hissed each word, a venomous dart. "Do you have any idea what this shirt costs? It costs more than you make in a month. But that's not the point, is it?" He took a step closer, invading her personal space, forcing her to look up at him. She could smell the expensive cologne, the wine on his breath. "The point," he continued, his voice dripping with contempt, "is incompetence. The point is that I come here to conduct business, to entertain important partners, and I am subjected to this clumsiness." He gestured vaguely at her, as if she were a piece of faulty equipment. His associate Peterson was pale with terror. "Sir, it was my fault. I moved my arm. Quiet, Peterson," Sterling snapped without looking at him. His laser focus was entirely on Clara. "People like you," he said to her, his voice dropping even lower, "are supposed to be invisible. You are background. You are furniture that moves. Your one job is not to screw up, and you can't even do that. What is your name?" Clara's throat was dry. "Clara, sir." He let out a short, mirthless laugh. "Clara, of course. A name as forgettable as your face." He leaned in his voice, a conspiratorial whisper that everyone at the table could hear. "Let me give you a piece of life advice, Clara. Some people are born to lead, to create, to matter. And some people are born to pour the wine. Know your place. You are utterly and completely insignificant. The words struck her harder than a physical blow. It wasn't just the anger. It was the casual cruelty, the deep-seated belief behind his words. He genuinely saw her as a lesser being. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot, coiling serpent in her gut. She could feel the stares of every person in the restaurant burning into her back. Marcus was now rushing over his face, a mask of frantic apology. "Mr. Sterling, I am terribly, terribly sorry. On behalf of the Gilded Sparrow, please, this entire meal is on us, and this employee will be dealt with immediately." Sterling shot Marcus a look that could curdle milk. "See that she is." He then turned to his Japanese guests, his demeanor shifting instantly back to one of oily charm, though his rage still simmered just beneath the surface. "Gentlemen, my sincerest apologies for this unfortunate interruption. A minor domestic disturbance. Please allow me to arrange for a private room where we can continue our discussion away from the help." He threw one last look of disgust at Clara, a look that said, "You are nothing," before striding away, leaving a trail of stunned silence in his wake. Clara stood frozen, the shattered remains of the decanter at her feet. The deep red wine pooled on the floor, looking unnervingly like blood. At that moment, something inside her shifted. The shame was still there, but beneath it, a different emotion began to smoulder. It was a cold, hard ember of anger, insignificant, forgettable, furniture that moves. She looked down at her hands, the hands that had cared for a dying mother, the hands that sketched buildings and paid bills. They were capable hands. She was not nothing. As Marcus began to gently guide her away from the scene, her mind went back to the unopened envelope in her locker. It was from the firm of Finch, Covington and Dunn, the executors of her late father's estate. She had been putting off opening it, afraid of what legal complexities and final goodbyes it might contain. But now Damien Sterling's cruel words echoed in her mind, and a new resolve took root. She would not be insignificant, and she had a sudden, powerful feeling that whatever was in that envelope was about to change everything. The walk to the staff locker room felt like a mile-long march of shame. The whispers of her colleagues, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity, followed her. Marcus was surprisingly gentle. He didn't fire her on the spot as she'd expected. "Take the rest of the night off, Clara," he said softly, handing her a glass of water. "Go home, we'll talk tomorrow." He knew a lawsuit for wrongful termination was the last thing the restaurant needed after a scene with a man like Sterling. But Clara didn't go home. She sank onto the hard bench in the locker room, the adrenaline from the confrontation leaving her hands trembling. Sterling's words played on a loop in her head. "Some people are born to pour the wine. Know your place." Her eyes fell on her locker, on the envelope. With a newfound urgency, she fumbled with the lock, her shaking fingers struggling with the combination. She pulled out the thick, cream-colored envelope. The embossed logo of Finch, Covington and Dunn seemed to stare up at her with an air of immense gravity. Her father, Arthur Prescott, had always used this firm. He had trusted one of the senior partners, Alistair Finch, implicitly. She tore it open. Inside was a letter several pages long, written on heavy bond paper, and a smaller sealed envelope, marked, "For Clara in my own hand." She unfolded the official letter first. The legalese was dense, but the core message was shockingly clear. It spoke of trusts of holding companies and of share structures so complex they made her head spin. Her father, a man she'd always thought of as a successful but modest builder, had been far more. The small company she knew, Prescott Construction, was merely the sentimental heart of a much larger and far wealthier entity. Years ago, seeking to expand, Arthur Prescott had entered into a partnership, forming a holding company to acquire and manage other businesses. The name of that holding company was Sterling Prescott Holdings. Clara read the sentence again and again. A cold dread mingled with a dawning, terrifying sense of disbelief washed over her. It couldn't be. It was a coincidence, a cruel joke by the universe. But there was no mistake. The letter detailed how her father, Arthur Prescott, had been the majority shareholder. He had retained 51% of the voting shares, a controlling interest he had never relinquished. His partner, a young, ambitious executive named Damien Sterling, controlled the other 49%. After Arthur's health had begun to fail, he had stepped back from day-to-day operations, ceding the role of CEO to Sterling under a strict contractual agreement. But he had always remained the quiet, guiding force, the true owner. And then came the final earth-shattering paragraph. As per the unalterable terms of the primary trust established by Mr. Arthur Prescott upon his death, his entire controlling interest of 51% in Sterling Prescott Holdings, along with all associated assets, passes directly and wholly to his sole heir, his daughter, Clara Annalise Evans. She was no longer Clara Evans. In the eyes of the law, she was Clara Prescott. She had used her mother's maiden name after her parents' divorce to give herself a sense of independence, a choice her father had always respected. The letter slipped from her fingers and fluttered to the floor. She stared at the grimy linoleum, her mind a blank slate of shock. Damien Sterling, the man who had just called her insignificant, forgettable furniture. The man who ran his company with an iron fist and a contempt for the little people. He wasn't the owner, he was an employee. And she, Clara, the clumsy waitress, was his new boss. The irony was so staggering, so profoundly absurd, that she almost laughed. It was a hollow, breathless sound in the empty locker room. The universe didn't just have a sense of humor, it had a taste for brutal, poetic justice. Her hands, no longer shaking, reached for the second envelope. Her father's familiar, strong handwriting was a comfort and a pain. She opened it. My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, then my time is over. I hope my passing was peaceful, and I hope you are not alone. I have so many regrets, my girl. The biggest is that I didn't tell you the full truth of my life's work. I kept it from you to protect you, to allow you to find your own path without the weight of my legacy. I see now that this may have been a mistake. It was pride. I wanted you to be an art historian, not a businesswoman. But the company is yours now. It is your burden and your opportunity. It was built on a simple principle that quality and integrity matter more than profit, and that the people who work for you are your greatest asset, not lines on a spreadsheet. I fear my partner Damien has forgotten this. He is brilliant, but he lacks a heart. He sees the world in numbers, not in people. Do with this inheritance what you will, my love. Sell it, run it, or burn it to the ground. It is yours. But I ask one thing of you before you make your decision. Look. Truly look. Understand what it is you now own. Understand the people whose livelihoods depend on it. My lawyer, Alistair Finch, will help you. He is the only man I ever trusted more than myself. Be strong, be wise, but most of all be the good and kind woman I always knew you were. All my love, forever dad tears, streamed down Clara's face, hot and silent. They were tears of grief for her father, but also tears of a strange, terrifying clarity. His final words were a call to action. Look, truly look. She looked at her reflection in the small locker mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed, her hair slightly askew. She was still wearing the drab grey uniform of the Gilded Sparrow, but when she looked into her own eyes, she saw something new. The smouldering ember of anger had been fanned into a flame. It was no longer just about the personal humiliation. It was about her father's legacy. Damien Sterling, the man who preached about cutting away sentimentality and legacy, was actively destroying the very principles upon which her company was built. A plan began to form in her mind, audacious and terrifying. She would not march into the Sterling Prescott headquarters tomorrow and announce herself. He wouldn't respect her. He would see the waitress and fight her with every legal and corporate weapon he had. He had to be shown, not told. He needed to be undone by the very thing he despised, the insignificant person he never saw coming. She would follow her father's advice. She would look. She would stay right where she was in the shadows. She would be Clara, the waitress. She would watch, she would listen, and she would learn. And when the time was right, the furniture would stand up, and Damien Sterling would finally know her name. She picked up her phone and dialed the number for Alistair Finch. Mr. Finch. She said, her voice quiet but firm, laced with a steel she didn't know she possessed. This is Clara Prescott. We need to talk, and we need to be discreet. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in duality. By day, Clara was a ghost in the corporate machine of Sterling Prescott Holdings. By night, she was a ghost in the dining room of the Gilded Sparrow. Her meeting with Alistair Finch had been a revelation. He was an older gentleman, with kind eyes that held a lawyer's shrewd intelligence. He had been expecting her call. He treated her not as a grieving daughter or a bewildered waitress, but as the rightful owner of a billion-dollar enterprise. Your father was a brilliant man, Ms. Prescott Finch had said, sitting opposite her in his stately wood-panelled office. He saw Damien Sterling's ambition and his ruthlessness. He hoped to temper it with his own philosophy, but he also put safeguards in place. Your 51% ownership is ironclad. The board can advise, but they cannot overrule you. You are, for all intents and purposes, the queen on the chessboard. Clara, who felt more like a pawn, outlined her plan. She didn't want to just take over. She wanted to understand the company from the inside out. She wanted to see the rot that Damien had introduced. Finch had smiled. An undercover boss. Very unorthodox. Your father would have admired your audacity. He became her guide, her cue to her James Bond. He granted her top-level anonymous access to the company's servers. From a cheap laptop in her small apartment, Clara logged in under a pseudonym A. Prescott began to dig. What she found was worse than she had imagined. Her father's company, once known for its craftsmanship and employee loyalty, was being systematically hollowed out. She started with the financials. Profits were up, astronomically so, but the methods were brutal. Damien had outsourced manufacturing for their signature leather goods line to overseas factories with questionable labor practices, replacing skilled artisans who had been with the company for decades. The quality had dipped a fact, hidden by an aggressive marketing campaign. Then she found the personnel files. She saw a pattern of corporate restructuring that targeted older, higher-paid employees, replacing them with younger, cheaper staff. The pension fund had been restructured to minimize company contributions. The most damning discovery was a file labeled AP Legacy Fund. It was a philanthropic initiative. Her father had started a fund that provided scholarships for the children of employees and emergency financial aid for families in crisis. It was his heart and soul codified. Under Damien's leadership, the fund had been quietly drained, its capital reallocated to cover executive bonuses and marketing overages. He was literally taking money from the families of his workers to pad his own pockets and sell a lie of superior quality. The anger she had felt in the restaurant now had a target. It wasn't just about his personal insult to her. It was about his systemic betrayal of thousands of people of her father's entire life's work. During the day, she devoured reports and spreadsheets. She learned the names of the board members, Evelyn Reed, the razor-sharp CFO, who was fiercely loyal to Damien, George Hammond, an old friend of her father's, who had been increasingly marginalized, and two others who seemed to vote whichever way the wind of power was blowing. At night, she would put on her grey uniform and return to the Gilded Sparrow. Marcus had been relieved when she'd shown up for her next shift, apologizing profusely and offering to keep her away from the main dining room. But Clara had insisted. "I'm fine, Marcus," she'd said. "I need the money." Working there was now a surreal experience. She would serve men and women who unknowingly sat on the board of her own company. She listened to their conversations, piecing together the corporate power dynamics from snippets of overheard gossip. She learned that George Hammond was deeply unhappy with the company's direction, and that Evelyn Reed was Damien's enforcer, feared by all. One evening, George Hammond came in for dinner alone. He looked tired and defeated. Clara was assigned his table. He was polite, but distracted. "Is everything all right?" Sir Clara asked, as she refilled his water. He looked up at her. Really looked at her for the first time. "It's a long story, young lady. Have you ever felt like you're watching something you helped build get torn down brick by brick?" Clara's heart pounded in her chest. "I think I know the feeling," she said, her voice soft. "This place used to stand for something." He mumbled more to himself than to her. Arthur Prescott. He was a good man. He believed in building things to last. Now, it's all just about the next quarter. The soul is gone. The conversation was a small spark of hope. She had an ally, even if he didn't know it yet. Her most nerve-wracking nights were when Damien Sterling returned. He came in twice more during those 2 weeks. He never once recognized her. To him, she was just another part of the scenery. The first time, he was with a glamorous model and ignored Clara so completely it was as if she were a ghost. The second time was different. He was meeting with a journalist for a puff piece. Clara watched him spin a web of lies, speaking passionately about Sterling Prescott's commitment to artisanal quality and employee empowerment. He even mentioned the Prescott Legacy Fund as one of his key initiatives, describing it as thriving. Clara had to grip the serving tray so tightly her knuckles turned white to keep from shouting right there in the middle of the restaurant. He was using her father's memory as a marketing tool while simultaneously desecrating it. That was the moment her plan crystallized. It wasn't enough to expose him. It wasn't enough to fire him. She had to dismantle his entire false reality in front of the very people whose respect he craved. She needed a stage, and she knew just the one. She called Alistair Finch the next morning. "Mr. Finch, when is the next quarterly board meeting?" "Next Friday the 24th, he replied. "Damien is set to announce record-breaking profits. He's planning to propose a massive stock buyback that will net him a personal bonus of over $20 million. "Perfect," Clara said, a cold calm settling over her. "Please send an anonymous message to the board. Inform them that a representative of the Prescott estate will be in attendance to observe the proceedings." "A representative?" Finch asked, a hint of excitement in his voice. "Yes," Clara replied, looking at her reflection. She wasn't a waitress or a ghost anymore. "Tell them the majority shareholder is sending someone to protect her interests. Let him sweat for a week. Let him wonder who is coming for his crown." The game was on. The anonymous email from Finch, Covington and Dunn landed in the inboxes of the Sterling Prescott board members like a perfectly timed grenade. It was brief, professional, and utterly destabilizing. To the board of directors of Sterling Prescott Holdings, please be advised that a representative of the Prescott estate will be in attendance at the quarterly meeting on October the 24th. The representative will be acting with the full authority of the majority shareholder to observe the proceedings and ensure her interests are being properly represented. Sincerely, Alistair Finch, Senior Partner, Finch, Covington and Dunn. The ripple effects were immediate. Clara, monitoring internal communications through her back-channel access, watched the panic unfold. Damien Sterling, who ruled his domain with absolute certainty, was suddenly faced with an unknown variable. The Prescott estate had been silent for a year. A sleeping giant he had likely assumed would stay asleep forever. The heir and unknown daughter he'd never bothered to track down was a non-entity in his mind. Now this ghost was sending a proxy. His emails to Evelyn Reed, the CFO, were frantic and demanding. Who is this? What do they want? Did Finch give you any names? Is it a bank? A trust manager? Evelyn's replies were clipped and efficient, but Clara could read the underlying tension. Finch is a locked box, Damien. He said only that the representatives would make themselves known at the meeting. Damien's paranoia went into overdrive. He ordered a complete audit of all departmental reports, demanding that every number be triple-checked. He scheduled extra prep meetings, grilling his vice presidents until they were pale with exhaustion. He was a man trying to find a crack in his own fortress, terrified that someone else had already found it. Clara saw her chance to subtly test the waters. Working with Finch, she had him send a single follow-up query to George Hammond, the old board member who had lamented the company's direction. The query was simple. The Prescott estate has concerns regarding the dissolution of the AP Legacy Fund. Can you provide any context? The response was telling. George Hammond wrote back a long, heartfelt email detailing his objections to the fund's closure and his failed attempts to argue for its preservation. He attached the original meeting minutes, where Damien had railroaded the decision through framing it as a necessary fiscal consolidation. In contrast, when Finch sent the same query to Evelyn Reed, her response was a single, cold sentence. All fiscal reallocations were approved by the board and are in full compliance with corporate bylaws. The battle lines were being drawn before the first shot was even fired. Meanwhile, Clara's life at the Gilded Sparrow continued. She was now a spy in plain sight. One evening, just 3 days before the board meeting, Damien Sterling came in with Evelyn Reed for a strategy dinner. They chose a secluded booth, but not secluded enough for Clara, who made sure she was the one assigned to their section. She approached the table notepad in hand, her face a perfect mask of professional deference. "Good evening." "May I get you something to drink?" Damien didn't even look up from the papers spread across the table. "Scotch. Macallan, 25. "Neat." Evelyn Reed, however, did look up. Her sharp, intelligent eyes lingered on Clara for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. It was a look Clara had seen before from powerful people, a quick, dismissive scan to categorize and file away. Waitress. Unimportant. Move on. The moment passed, and she ordered sparkling water. For the next 2 hours, Clara served them refilling drinks, delivering their food, and listening to every word. Their conversation was a chilling window into their worldview. The Prescott ghost is spooking the street. Damien grumbled, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "We need to present a united front. The numbers are undeniable. Profit is the only thing that matters. This representative, whoever he is, will be a bean counter from a bank. Show him the money and he'll crawl back into his hole." And Hammond Evelyn asked, her voice low. "George is a dinosaur," Damien sneered. "He's still living in the era of company picnics and gold watches. He'll make some sentimental speech about Arthur's vision. I'll let him, and then we'll vote him down." as always. Clara felt a fresh wave of cold fury. They were so certain, so arrogant in their private bubble of power. But it was Damien's next words that truly cemented her resolve. Evelyn pushed a file towards him. This is the final proposal for the V-Series handbag line. It involves closing the last domestic workshop in Ohio. We'll be laying off the remaining 60 artisans. It will increase our profit margin by another 4%. Damien barely glanced at it. Do it. They're overpaid anyway. Any skilled worker who thinks they're irreplaceable in a global economy is a fool. They're cogs in a machine, and cogs can be replaced. He took a long sip of his scotch. Sentiment is a liability. Clara stood by the service station, polishing a wine-glass her back to them. Cogs in a machine. The phrase echoed in her mind. Her father had known the names of the men and women in that Ohio workshop. He had called them artists. She walked back to their table to clear the dessert plates. As she reached for Damien's empty plate, he looked up, annoyed by the interruption. His eyes met hers. For a second, there was a flicker of something, a vague, misplaced sense of familiarity. He had seen her face before, recently. But where? The restaurant, another one. 1,000 different service people passed through his life. They were all a blur. He frowned, then dismissed the thought as quickly as it came. He waved a hand at her. Just the check. As Clara ran his credit card, she looked at the name, embossed on the platinum plastic, Damien Sterling. Below it, in smaller letters, CEO Sterling Prescott Holdings. She handed the receipt back to him. Thank you, Mr. Sterling. Have a good evening? Her voice was steady, her expression neutral. But inside, she was making a vow. He would not close that workshop. He would not lay off those artisans. He would not win. He thought he was playing chess with a ghost, a faceless representative from a law firm. He had no idea he was sitting 3 feet away from the Queen, and she was about to checkmate him. The morning of October 24th dawned grey, and overcast the sky, a blanket of steel over the city. Clara woke before sunrise. There was no waitress uniform laid out for her today. Instead, hanging on the back of her bedroom door was an outfit she had purchased with the last of her own money, a deliberate choice. It was a simple, elegant, dark charcoal pantsuit. It wasn't flashy, but it was perfectly tailored. It spoke of seriousness and authority, not wealth. It was a uniform of a different kind. She showered and got dressed, the unfamiliar fabric feeling strange against her skin. This was armor. As she styled her hair into a simple professional bun, she looked at herself in the mirror. The tired, harried waitress was gone. The woman looking back at her was someone else. Her eyes were clear and focused, holding a quiet intensity. The weeks of digging, listening, and planning had forged a new confidence in her. She was no longer just Arthur Prescott's daughter. She was the guardian of his legacy. A car sent by Alistair Finch was waiting for her downstairs. She spent the ride to the Sterling Prescott Tower, going over her notes one last time. It was a formidable stack financial reports, highlighting the disparity between rising profits and declining quality, damning internal emails, a detailed analysis of the gutted legacy fund, and most importantly, a list of names. The names of the artisans in the Ohio workshop. The names of the long-term employees who had been forced into early retirement. The names of the children whose scholarships had vanished. She wouldn't just be fighting with numbers. She would be fighting with lives. Alistair Finch was waiting for her in the marble and glass lobby. He looked her up and down, a proud, fatherly smile on his face. Arthur would be so incredibly proud of you, Clara. He said, his voice thick with emotion. Let's hope I can do right by him, she replied, her own voice steady. You have the truth on your side. In my experience, that is the most powerful weapon in any room." He handed her a slim leather portfolio. "Everything is in order. You are legally and officially recognized as the majority shareholder. When you speak with the full weight of the Prescott estate." They rode the silent high-speed elevator to the 40th floor where the boardroom was located. As the doors opened, they stepped into a hushed, opulent reception area. A nervous-looking executive assistant hurried towards them. "Mr. Finch, welcome. We were expecting you." The assistant's eyes darted to Clara, a flicker of confusion in her expression. She was clearly expecting an older man, a banker or a lawyer, not this poised young woman. "The meeting is about to begin," Finch said smoothly. "We won't be late." He gestured for Clara to walk ahead. The doors to the boardroom were massive, carved from dark mahogany. Clara took one final deep breath and pushed them open. The room was exactly as she'd pictured it, a long, polished table reflecting the grey sky, outside high-backed leather chairs, and the faint, expensive scent of power. The board members were all there, seated. At the head of the table, looking impatient and imperious, was Damien Sterling. He looked up as they entered his eyes, immediately locking on Alistair Finch. A look of strained cordiality settled on his face. "Alistair, good of you to come," he said, rising from his chair. "We were just about to start. You must be the representative from the estate." His gaze then slid to Clara, standing just behind Finch. He didn't recognize her, not even a glimmer. In his mind, the context was so utterly impossible that his brain simply didn't make the connection. She was a lawyer's assistant, a junior associate. "Furniture, and this is your—" he asked, trailing off with a dismissive wave in her direction. Alistair Finch stepped to the side, a subtle, deliberate movement that left Clara standing alone in the full view of the entire board. "Mr. Sterling, members of the board," Finch began, his voice resonating with quiet authority. "I am here today only in an advisory capacity. The representative of the Prescott estate, the sole heir and majority shareholder of this company, is here to speak for herself." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the silent room. "Allow me to introduce you all to Ms. Clara Prescott." The name Prescott hit the room first. George Hammond's eyes widened in surprise. Evelyn Reed's perfectly composed face tightened almost imperceptibly. But Damien Sterling was still processing. He stared at Clara, a deep frown creasing his brow. The name was familiar, of course, but the face was still just a nagging, unimportant whisper in the back of his mind. He had seen her somewhere. A restaurant, a gala. It didn't matter. Clara met his gaze directly. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, but her expression was calm, her eyes like chips of ice. She let the silence stretch, forcing him to truly look at her, to see past the pantsuit, past the boardroom, back to a Tuesday night of spilled wine and shattered glass. And then she saw it. The flicker in his eyes, the dawning, horrified recognition. His mouth fell slightly open. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. The CEO, the titan of industry, looked as if he had just seen a ghost. Clara gave him a small, cold smile. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice clear and steady, carrying to every corner of the room. "We've met before. You said I had a forgettable face." She pulled out the chair at the opposite end of the table, her father's chair, and sat down, placing her portfolio gently on the polished surface. "Let's begin." The boardroom was trapped in a state of suspended animation. The ticking of the large clock on the wall sounded like a hammer striking an anvil. George Hammond was staring at Clara with dawning comprehension and a glimmer of hope. Evelyn Reed's face was an unreadable mask of stone, but her fingers were clenched tightly around her pen. The other two board members looked back and forth between Clara and Damien, their expressions a mixture of confusion and fear. But all the oxygen in the room seemed to be consumed by Damien Sterling. His face had cycled through a kaleidoscope of emotions: shock, disbelief, denial, and finally, a simmering, desperate rage. He looked from Clara to Alistair Finch, and back again, as if trying to will this absurd reality away. "This is a joke," he finally choked out his voice, a hoarse whisper. "This is some kind of ridiculous, pathetic joke." He pointed a trembling finger at Clara. "She's a waitress. I saw her just a few weeks ago at the Gilded Sparrow. She spilled wine all over me." Clara met his frantic gaze without flinching. "Yes, I was a waitress, Mr. Sterling. And yes, I spilled wine on you, after your associate knocked my arm. But you weren't interested in the details, were you? You were too busy telling me to know my place." She let that hang in the air for a moment, before turning her attention to the rest of the board. "Good morning. I am Clara Prescott. For those of you who knew my father, Arthur Prescott, you know he believed this company was a family. For those of you who didn't allow me to tell you what he stood for, integrity, quality, and a fundamental respect for the people who dedicated their lives to building this enterprise." She opened her portfolio. For the past year, Mr. Sterling, as CEO, has operated under the assumption that the majority shareholder was an absentee, uninterested party. He was mistaken. Damien slammed his hand on the table, his composure finally snapping. "This is outrageous, Alistair. What is the meaning of this? You cannot be serious. The heir to the Prescott fortune is a clumsy server. The heir to the Prescott fortune," Finch stated calmly, "is the woman sitting at the end of this table. Her identity has been legally verified, and her 51% controlling interest is a matter of public record. She has every right to be here." Clara took control again, her voice cutting through the tension. "I've spent the last several weeks not just working at the Gilded Sparrow, but also reviewing the state of my company. And what I've found is deeply disturbing." She looked directly at Damien. "You're here today to present record profits, and you are to be congratulated. But at what cost?" She slid a document down the table. "Let's start with the V-Series handbag line, marketed as a pinnacle of American artisanal craftsmanship. Yet I have here supply chain invoices that show 80% of the components are sourced from a factory in Southeast Asia, with numerous labor complaints filed against it. Is that your definition of artisanal?" "Mr. Sterling," Damien sputtered, "global diversification is a standard business practice." "My father had a word for it," Clara interrupted smoothly. "Lying." She slid another document across the table. "Let's talk about the employee pension fund, restructured 6 months ago, to, and I quote from your own memo, maximize capital efficiency. The result is that this company has reduced its contribution by 60%, while our longest-serving employees will see their retirement benefits cut by nearly a third." And yet she paused, looking at Evelyn Reed. "Executive bonuses have increased by 200% in the same period." Evelyn's stony facade finally cracked. She refused to meet Clara's eyes. And then Clara's voice grew softer, laced with a dangerous edge. "There is the matter of the Arthur Prescott Legacy Fund, the scholarship and aid fund for our employees' families. You told a journalist in my hearing that the fund was thriving. But it's empty, isn't it, Mr. Sterling? Drained to cover marketing expenses, and according to this transfer authorization signed by you and Miss Reed, to pay for the lease on your new corporate jet." George Hammond let out a low groan, burying his face in his hands. Clara stood up, walking slowly along the side of the table, her presence commanding the room. "You've taken my father's name, his company, his legacy, and you've twisted it into a hollow shell, a machine for making money that has lost its soul. You talk about cutting away sentiment as if it's a weakness. You call skilled artisans cogs in a machine. You call people like me, the people who serve your food, clean your offices, and build your products, invisible. She stopped directly behind Damien Sterling's chair, forcing him to crane his neck to look up at her. You told me I was insignificant, Mr. Sterling. But the funny thing about insignificant people is that there are a lot of us. And we see everything. She walked back to her seat at the head of the table. The power in the room had shifted so completely, it was a physical force. Damien Sterling, for the first time in his life, looked small. Therefore, Clara said, her voice ringing with finality, as the majority shareholder of Sterling Prescott Holdings, I am exercising my authority. I am calling an immediate vote of no confidence in our current CEO. She looked at George Hammond. George. He looked up, his eyes filled with a renewed sense of purpose. Aye. She looked at the two wavering board members, Mr. Davies, Ms. Brown. They saw the future sitting at the head of the table, and they saw the disgraced past squirming in his chair. They nodded one after the other. Aye, aye. She didn't need to look at Evelyn Reed. Finally, she looked at Damien. The motion carries. Damien, you are hereby removed as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. Your shares are subject to the penalty clauses in your contract regarding gross mismanagement and misrepresentation of company assets. I believe you'll find that sentiment is, indeed, a liability. Damien Sterling stared at her, his face a canvas of pure impotent fury. The man who had judged her, dismissed her, and humiliated her was now undone by her. He had been so busy looking up at the sky, he never noticed the ground beneath his feet was opening up. You can't do this, he whispered. Clara leaned forward, her voice a low, clear echo of his own words from that fateful night. Some people are born to lead, Mr. Sterling, and some people are born to pour wine. You just spent a year proving which one you are. Now it's time for you to know your place. Get out of my company. The story of Clara Prescott and Damien Sterling isn't just about a satisfying moment of revenge. It's a powerful lesson wrapped in a real-life drama. It teaches us that a person's worth is not defined by their job title, their bank account, or the clothes they wear. True power lies in character, in integrity, and in the quiet dignity with which we treat others. Damien Sterling saw a waitress and dismissed her, never imagining the strength and legacy hidden beneath the surface. He learned in the most public and humiliating way possible that the person you step on today might be the one signing your termination papers tomorrow. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that everyone deserves respect, and that karma has a way of finding even the most powerful people, then please help us share this message. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more true stories that uncover the hidden heroes and surprising twists of everyday life. Let us know in the comments, what's the best story of workplace karma you've ever witnessed? We can't wait to read your stories. Thank you for listening.